history and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition of Point of View. So grateful that you could join us, and I hope you had a great weekend. As many of you probably figured out, we were out traveling and meeting all sorts of friends and donors and potential donors and listeners in Georgia and South Carolina. And of course, I suspect some of you would like to hear some of the thoughts that we have about Charlie Kirk. Of course, we, I think, did a very good job last week, even when we were out. We certainly want to thank Dr. Merrill Matthews is hosting the program, Liberty McCarter, and others. But in the second hour, we will spend some time getting into that more detail. And I've posted a couple of articles that I think you will find very helpful in that regard. But we were excited about the fact that we had heard that there was going to be a Women in Apologetics Conference taking place right down the road from where we're broadcasting here today. And as you may be aware, we have, over these many years, had a chance to address all sorts of people in apologetics. But I thought I might feature for a second some of the women that certainly have been on the program. Nancy Piercy has been on since almost the beginning, as well as Hillary Morgan Ferrer, who used to live in this area. Mary Jo Sharp, we've had on a couple of times, as well as Melissa Kane Travis on a pretty regular basis. We thought it would be great for you to meet some other individuals, women that are working in this area of apologetics. So we're going to have a conversation with them in this first hour. Then we're going to get into some issues in the news, which I think you'll find helpful. Sitting across from me is Amy Davison, and she is an Air Force veteran. We were talking off air about some of her responsibilities there, but an Air Force veteran turned apologist, and has received her master's degree in Christian apologetics from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. She writes on issues ranging from biblical sexuality, cultural challenges to Christianity, equipping parents to raise warriors in the faith, and she will be speaking on the whole issue of alleged contradictions in the Bible. She and her husband are busy raising 4 children right here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. But Amy, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's, if we can, also welcome to the microphone by phone Michele Marsili, and she has a bachelor's degree in photography as well as an MBA, and will soon complete her master's of a Christian apologetics area as well. She has also worked for a defense contractor, so we have a lot of military connections here as well, and has a real passion for this area of apologetics. We'll also be speaking at the Women in Apologetics Conference. So, Michele, welcome to Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's, if we can, Amy, get you closer to the microphone for just a minute and talk about how you first came into this area of apologetics, because I have found that some of the people that do the best are people that have served in the military, maybe were in a police force, J. Warner Wallace, people like that, or were engineers. And so in some respects, the jump isn't that great, but nevertheless, how'd you get involved in this whole area of apologetics?
Man, that was purely a God thing. We were stationed in Germany, and we were getting ready to come back to the States. And my husband, being an Atlanta Braves fan, felt that God was calling us to Georgia, naturally. And so when the base list came out and there was this opening for a place called Fort Worth, which we had to Google, we had no idea where Fort Worth was, he felt that God was really leading us to Texas. And so we arrived in Texas, and I somehow stumbled upon an ad for the very first Stand Firm conference that was going to be held at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And I just felt led to go there. And the whole weekend was amazing, because here were all these huge questions about the faith that I had grown up having but never had any answers to. And there were answers. And at the end of the conference, the professor announced that they were going to open up a degree program. And it was like God just kind of shoved me in the back saying, this is what you're supposed to do. And so I was finishing up my bachelor's, and I immediately enrolled in their master's program. And it's just been a huge blessing, because as someone who, within this realm, sometimes we can think that worship is an act of music that we sing, prior prior to the sermon on Sundays. But no, when we actually look at Scripture, we see that we are to love God with our minds as well. And apologetics is an act of worship that we get to do, and it's a huge blessing.
Might just mention, too, that Pro Ministries is one of the sponsors, Summit Ministries, where you sent one of your children.
Oh, yeah.
Stand to Reason, Reasons of Faith, all sorts of great organizations. So if you go to the website, you're going to see that we have bios for both of our guests here today, and you can click on that. If you click on Amy's, for example, it'll take you to, again, womenandapologetics.com, and then the conference, and you can see some of the speakers, and you can see some of the individuals. And if you find yourself saying, well, I would like to know what they're doing, is there a way that I can hear more about that? And I think, of course, you can. You can see many of the sponsors. But also, we also have, if you click down a little bit for where Michelle's piece is, we have Mama Bear Apologetics. And, of course, that's something else we'll talk about in just a minute. But, Michele, I think the obvious question to you is, again, as an individual that has already worked in the arts, what caused you to want to get into this area of apologetics?
You know, it would be similar to what Amy just said. It was a total God thing. I'm a very logical person, and I honestly couldn't tell you when I first heard the word apologetics, but when I first started looking into it was 2018, and thankfully I very quickly found I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Frank Turek. I read that, and I was like, this is what I've been looking for, to have logic. And from then on, I did pretty much read every book I could get my hands on, and then 2020 found Women in Apologetics, and then shortly signed up afterwards. And it has been such a blessing, much like Amy said, being able to worship God with my mind and being able to use the analytical gifts that he's given me that I get to use at work and use that for the kingdom. And I've met the most incredible people, and it is such a benefit to my faith. It has strengthened me to be able to answer questions I had growing up as well that I didn't have an answer to, and now I'm able to see God has given us so much evidence.
I might just mention, too, that book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, written by, first of all, Norm Geisler. Norm Geisler and I, over the years, have done a number of debates, and we were on college campuses back before there was even a Charlie Kirk. Frank Turek, co-author of that book, was actually standing next to Charlie Kirk last week when that shooting took place. We'll talk more about that in just a few minutes, but a great resource and many of these other resources. And I thought, let me go around the round table because both of you are familiar with Mama Bear Apologetics, and I wanted to make sure that people knew about that for a couple of reasons. And that is, first of all, Amy, when we were in Savannah, and I've been all over the place, we were in Augusta and we've been in Beaufort and we were in Savannah, but we were in Savannah. One of the questions from the women there was, I have middle school kids, and I'm wondering what we can do to help them and what kind of curriculum. And first of all, you've seen some of the booklets here on topics you address, and I've addressed as well. But I also just said, well, as a commercial, you might want to listen on Monday, that first hour, because we're going to talk about women in apologetics. But one of your goals has really been to equip parents to raise kids to be warriors in the faith. And it seems to me that one of the visions that, and again, I'm old enough to remember when this all got started, Mama Bear Apologetics, is to really equip parents to help these young kids really begin to know how to answer the questions that they're now encountering in grade school and middle school. Used to be they only encountered them in high school and college, but the culture has changed, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my son was third grade when he was challenged on his faith with regards to the creation of the universe. And because we had a conversation on the Kalam cosmological argument, he was able to bust that out on the playground. It was awesome. I'm like, here's an extra cookie, buddy. And that's what's so wonderful about Mama Bear Apologetics is we are there to come alongside women, same with women in apologetics, and help build them up in the faith because we recognize that parents are the primary discipler of their children. And so that's what's such a blessing about both of these ministries is they do that, just that.
I'm going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to get into a little bit more of the detail. Also, I want to get some comments from Michele about that as well, because we do have a link there to mamabearapologetics.com. Going to talk about some of these issues and even get into some of the topics they'll be addressing at the conference. Stay tuned. We have a lot more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
What does the word Christian mean these days? It doesn't seem to mean very much. The last few reports from George Barna's Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University reveal that a very small percentage of American Christians have a Christian worldview. Nearly 7 in 10 of Americans self-identify as Christians, yet only 4% of Americans have a Christian worldview. George Barna explains, Christian has become somewhat of a generic term rather than a name that reflects a deep commitment to passionately pursuing and being like Jesus Christ. The self-identified Christians may embrace many basic doctrines of the Christian faith, but then diverge in one or more important issues. For example, a significant number deny the idea of objective truth rooted in Scripture. They deny the existence of absolute truth and thus make their decisions based upon relative ethics and personal experience. Most Christians may say they believe in the Bible and the gospel message, but they also indicated on their surveys that they believe people are basically good. Of course, if people believe they are good, then they may not believe in sin and the need for a Savior. Now, if you look at the cultural issues, you'll find even more discrepancies between their views and a Christian worldview. These differences in biblical beliefs will then manifest themselves in the widely divergent views today held among American Christians on questions of morality and politics. This includes divergent views on sex, marriage, family, and abortion, and those in turn affect how American Christians vote on candidates and key political issues. If you're a pastor or Bible teacher, you need to get back to the basics. It is likely that many of the people you teach do not have a Christian worldview. They need your biblical teaching and biblical discipleship. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Topic today is apologetics, and I might just mention that we're talking about women in apologetics and the conference, and you can find out more about that. Also talk about Mama Bear Apologetics, and if you would like to know a little bit more, I would encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. Maybe even keep track of some of the books we mention here, some of the resources, because you can be involved in self-study as well. And we're privileged to have with us both Amy and Michele. And Amy, let me let you finish off for just a minute, because we're talking about Mama Bear Apologetics, and you equip one of your sons to actually talk about the Kalam argument. And a lot of people are going, okay, I don't even know what that is, which is one of the reasons why you wanted to maybe follow some of the things that William Lane Craig and other people have been writing about the year. But it's, again, going to be more important than ever for us, not only as adults and parents, but for our children to know not only what they believe, but why they believe. And we have a Know Why podcast that Liberty McCarter does. We need to get you on for sure, because more and more young people are looking for the facts. They're not looking for any kind of nuanced presentation or generalized statement. They're really looking for, is this true and can I believe it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we love doing at Mama Bear, is not only taking challenges to the faith within the realm of apologetics, but also doing observation within culture and things especially that are reaching our kids. So recently we released a podcast with regard to K-pop Demon Hunter. And, you know, so many parents had questions, and we all watched the video, and then we're able to comment, okay, well, here's the good, here's the problematic, and here's how you can have good conversations with your children, because that's what we as parents are meant to be, is the primary disciple of our kids. And the whole point of Mama Bear is to get it to where it's accessible and you see how practical it is to your everyday discipleship of your kids. Because when you take advantage of those few minutes in the car with them, you can lay the foundations for a strong faith.
Michele, let me come to you, because, of course, you have been speaking in a variety of different venues, and you are familiar with that organization as well. And what can maybe some of our listeners use, and how can they benefit from some of the material that is even on the website that we've listed here today?
Yeah, Mama Bear Apologetics is such a fantastic organization. And what I love about it is I'm unmarried, I don't have children, and I can leverage that because it is so practical that when I help with youth group or when I'm with my nieces and my nephews, I'm able to still apply those same facts. Especially, I love how it breaks it down by age group so that you don't have to figure out how to communicate it. It really gives you the step by step. And then anytime one of my friends gets pregnant with their first child, those are the books that I give to them when they're having the baby shower. But again, it's very practical, and I think that's what's so great is especially the way they're written. They have titles that will make you laugh, and they make it very tangible, and I think that's why it's so impactful.
That's why I wanted to come to you, because one of them that's posted right now, Roaring Through K-Pop Demon Hunters, got a picture of you there, Amy, as well as Hillary and others, and that is for you. You're not necessarily answering questions that you have because you don't have kids, but they're answering questions that you run into when you go out and speak. And it does seem to me that what I want to do is, in many cases, equip the parents, because when they get a question like this, they have no idea where to go to find an answer. So talk about that, because it seems to me that this is, I think, the kind of the cutting edge of where sort of more popular apologetics is going, don't you think?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, preparing parents and just preparing any adult, because, you volunteer at church and kids have such amazing questions, but sometimes they catch you off guard. And this is what allows you to be prepared and to be confident and to have a resource you can trust, especially when they give you the supporting resources. So if you want to dig deeper, you can. It's very empowering and gives you a very solid foundation as you're stepping into culture and you're stepping into these very challenging questions.
We can maybe talk about whether or not we're under-challenging our young people, because you're going to be talking about some aspects of God and the character of God and the rest. And it does seem to me sometimes, Michele, that we say, well, this is a concept that maybe is too abstract, it's too difficult. But I think you are certainly recognizing that we need to teach good theology, we need to teach good apologetics, don't we?
Absolutely. Something I think a lot of us will say is, a good apologist is a good theologian. And I agree with you. I think kids want to be challenged. I think adults want to be challenged too, because it makes you grow your faith. And if we are to love the Lord with all our mind, we need to ask those challenging questions. And then we also need to rest in faith that, especially like I'm going to be speaking on the Trinity, it is always going to be unfathomable because we're a finite being attempting to understand an infinite God. But there is a confidence that comes with that you can never exhaust him, and he will always reveal more, and it deepens the faith. And so I think asking those tough intellectual questions is a good thing because it encourages then a deeper dive into theology and then hopefully some apologetics as well, depending on the questions.
One of the things you're going to be doing, and then I'll get back to Amy, is, but Michele, you're going to be talking about some of the heretical ideas. And if next time you come into our studio, you will see, as Amy has seen, that we've got lots of little booklets, and I've got them on biblical reliability, arguments for the existence of God, all sorts of things. But one of our booklets is on heresy, and every one of the heresies goes back to some of the things that were taught, these false ideas that were taught about God. And it does seem to me, if I can borrow a phrase from the scriptures, there's nothing new under the sun. We're running into heresies today in the 21st century, but we find that in the first, second, and third century, we had those heresies, didn't we?
100%. It's got a new label, but every heresy is compromising at least one part of the Trinity. So are you sacrificing God as monotheistic, or that there are three divine persons, or that they're co-equal, co-eternal? When we have a good understanding of the theology, we're now better empowered to then debunk the heretical views that come up and then offer a strong defense. But you're absolutely right. I mean, they come around again. They just put a different label on it. But yeah, we can go back. We can read the early church fathers. They were pushing back against the same thing. You read the Athanasian Creed, and they were doing their best to defend against all of the heretical views that were rising up in the early church.
Yeah, again, when I talk about Marcion, people say, oh, you believe in Martians? No. This is why theology is important, and sometimes taking some of these classes in Christian apologetics are really important. Amy, let me come to you because you're going to talk about alleged contradictions in the Bible and how to respond. And I've said before that when I've been on college campuses, almost always have at least some 18-year-old, 19-year-old say, well, I don't believe the Bible because of there are contradictions in the Bible. And my quick question to them is, name one. And they start looking at their feet because they just know they're supposed to say that, but they don't know what they are. But there have been lots of books, Amy, lots of curricula put together dealing with so-called alleged contradictions in the Bible or Bible difficulties. And that is an issue for some of these young people, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And what you just covered is the tendency to sort of spout a tagline. What we need is more research and less retweeting. But yet within the younger Gen Z generation, if they can have sort of a knockout statement, it feels like, oh man, as long as I can bust this out, then I have won the conversation. But so much of the issues with perceived contradictions within Scripture is actually just errors in basic hermeneutics, to where a lot of these young people don't know how to read Scripture well. So then when they take two different accounts from two different witnesses, and we all know that everybody remembers details differently depending on what appeals to them or what strikes them as odd or as something that they can remember quickly, then that's going to cause differences. So one of the things that we're going to be covering in my session is from Dr. Tim McGrew, and how he talks about these 5 different culprits for common ideas of contradictions. And that's, carelessness, conflation, completeness, context, and I'm messing up the 5th one there. It's leaving my brain. But there are all of these different things to where when we actually look at Scripture, it usually falls under one of these 5 characteristics, to where maybe I'm just not reading the passage carefully, or I'm taking it out of context, or I'm confusing 2 different events as the same event.
Right.
To where just a basic in hermeneutics can actually help alleviate most and nearly all of these claims of contradictions within Scripture.
Might just mention, for those of you who might say, well, I'd like to know more about that, we've had Tim McGrew in studio.
Isn't he great?
And we've also had his wife by phone. She couldn't make it in, but we've talked about some of the facts that we actually are answering questions in one gospel with answers in another gospel, and
yes,
some very important ways to talk about that as well. So let me, just before we take a break, mention that we do have an action item for you today. If you are an individual that receives our email, you probably have already seen it. If you go to the website right now, we're encouraging the United States Senate to pass what is called the FIRM Act. This is something that our good friend Senator Tim Scott has put together, and it has to do with the issue of debanking. We've talked about that before with Lathan Watts, who is the vice president of Alliance Defending Freedom. And we've seen a lot of people debanked, not just conservatives, not just Christians, not just people that maybe had questions about vaccines, but even individuals that were in Silicon Valley, which is hardly a bastion of Christianity or conservatism. And so this issue of debanking is something that President Trump has already addressed in an executive order, but we really need to pass this piece of legislation. So I will mention more about that in the second hour, but if you have already received the email, we encourage you to contact your 2 United States senators. We'll come back with more right after this.
America's founding was shaped by a biblical worldview, but you will rarely hear that truth today. Think about this. If your child or grandchild was asked to articulate how Christian values shaped America's founding based on the education they received in school and from popular media, could they do it? Well, you can be part of restoring an appreciation for America's godly heritage, and we need you. Truth Team Week is right around the corner, kicking off September 22nd, and you're invited to participate in Point of View's mission to restore America's godly heritage and a Christian worldview in this nation by joining the Truth Team. But you don't have to wait to make a difference. You can make a donation right now and learn more about the Truth Team by visiting us online at pointofview.net or by calling 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with me today is Amy Davison, as well as by phone, Michele Marsili. And we were just mentioning a minute ago, and I knew this was in here, this is our booklet on a biblical reliability, a biblical view on biblical reliability. And I mentioned Tim McGrew, who's been working with his wife, Lydia McGrew. And that book, by the way, is called Hidden in Plain View, Undesigned Coincidences. Just some great resources that we try to make available to you. And so since you happened to mention that, that was the case. But just before I get back to Michele, Amy, let me continue on alleged contradictions, because some of them are how many women were at the tomb, how many angels, those kinds of things. But you're finding more and more the questions that are coming from, say, Gen Y and Gen Z are more philosophical questions. And I might just mention that we're just about ready to send out the October Outlook. I'll hold that up for some of you. And the piece here by Liberty McCarter is Know Why God is Good. And that basically, she has the podcast called the Know Why Podcast, which is one of our 3 podcasts we make available. And you seem to be finding that sometimes the alleged contradictions in the Bible aren't so much about, well, Mark says this and Matthew says this, or John says this and Luke says that, but rather, well, how could I believe in a goodness of God when I see that these people that call themselves Christians don't necessarily affirm people that are LGBTQ, right? Is that what you're running into?
Oh, absolutely. That's where a lot of the big struggle is. And so many of these young people don't realize that they've bought into the worldly definitions of now this idea of what truth is or what love is supposed to be defined at. I mean, I've worked in Christian co-ops, Christian private schools, and had my children in public school. And so many of the kids within the Christian settings, I mean, they grow up and they have no idea that they have bought this secular worldview, and they're trying to mash it up with Christianity. And so often Christianity is what gets left out. So with our young people, especially with regards to this past week, what's so important is for them to recognize, okay, baby, how are they defining truth? And so much of today's definition of truth is whether or not it affirms social justice ideology or LGBTQ ideology. That's what's considered true. And now we no longer have falsehood. Instead, we have what's called hate or harm, which is heavily, it appeals to the emotion. It appeals to reaction, and we have to fight back against this. But so many kids aren't being stopped and asked, okay, but wait a second, is this actually harm? What actually is this definition of alleged hate? And is that truly hateful for the individual to be told, in fact, the actual truth? And so for what Gen Z really needs is they need someone who just takes the time to talk about these big issues with them and let them ask all of their questions in a non-hostile environment, to where then they can realize, oh man, maybe I'm actually buying into the secular worldview and not even realizing it.
Michele, let me come to you, because Colossians 2:8 talks about the fact that Paul says that you should see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, depending on human tradition. And it does seem to me that one of the areas where we need to do the greatest amount of work isn't just to answer the questions of the non-Christians, and we certainly need to do that, but to help Christians think biblically about every area of life and not buy into some of the things that Amy just talked about a minute ago.
I completely agree. We often can talk past each other because, culture and society has redefined certain words. And I think it's in the first Mama Bear Apologetics book about linguistic theft. But it's important that we learn how to think critically. And I think that that's something that has been lost. But we need to make sure that we don't take for granted what we mean when we say truth or when we say love, because then just trying to convey the gospel, it can get very muddied. And what Women in Apologetics has done is we came up with short courses that really tackle those things. What is truth? What is logic? What is a worldview, to help empower believers to be able to step into those conversations and have a firm foundation of understanding those terms, and then, how they could be misconstrued as you begin to communicate the truth about God.
Let me come back to the fact that you are a curriculum developer and come back to the question I got when I was in Savannah. That is, do you have curriculum, the question was asked, or can you point us to curriculum that would help us? Because I think what I'm sensing is a fair number of Christian parents, evangelical Christian parents, say, I'm a little bit surprised at the really crazy ideas that my children, or in some cases my grandchildren, are picking up from social media. And do we have some curricula that we can point them to begin to develop their thinking along biblical lines? Can you help us with that?
Yes and yes. Women in Apologetics, our mission statement is educating, equipping, and encouraging women in Christian apologetics. So we have curriculum. Some of it is free. Some of it is paid resources, the short courses. We have an Islam, foundations class. And then we have so many other groups that we partner with, that we have vetted, that we point people to empower them as well. So the website has a bunch of information, but it is designed to empower parents and women so that they know where to go to get reliable sources of information as these questions come back to them, from their children or just from friends or family.
I might just mention, too, that, of course, people are listening to this all the way across the country, from Florida to Maine, from California to Alaska. And even though this conference is coming up, and some of you might say, well, I'd really like to attend it, we're giving you enough time to actually make sure that you can get a plane flight or drive to it. But even if you can't, we do, of course, have a link to womeninapologetics.com. But let me just for a few minutes mention that the conference is taking place September 26th and 27th. And so if you'd like to meet these individuals and many others I've mentioned, it is taking place at 121 Community Church, which is in Grapevine. I've spoken there at that church before and know exactly where it is. And it's easy to find because it's off of 121. So that's easy enough. We have information about what the various sessions are, the speakers, and there's a section there called trip planning, because some of you might say, this is exactly what I need. And you've heard both Amy and Michele say, this was just a God thing. Well, this particular broadcast could be a God thing. And you might say, is it really possible that I can go and be with these individuals? And first of all, bring a empty suitcase, because you'll end up buying a lot of books, won't you?
Absolutely.
100%.
It's just unbelievable, and books and resources and getting your picture taken with some of these individuals. So we wanted to give you enough time that if you wanted to drive to it or fly to it, that is the case. If you say, well, okay, I'm not going to be able to make it to the conference, then just simply click on womeninapologetics.com and you'll see that there are some other resources there. There's the blog that exists. There are some ways in which you can explore the academy courses and a variety of others. And Michele, let me come back to you, because these academy courses are pretty significant, and I would highly recommend anybody who really wants to be an apologist to go to one of these great schools. And there are many from the West Coast to the East Coast in which you can study, but there are also some great ways in which individuals in the privacy of their home with their own computers can learn some things, can't they?
100%. I mean, I think what's so great about the time we live in is that it's easy to get this information. Finding the time might be challenging, but we serve a God who is outside time, and so he opens up the opportunity when we commit to discovering more about him. But it really is, I would just say, go out, look. If you want to go back to school, we have recommendations for that. If you kind of want to dip your toe into it, we've got some short courses to just kind of help you see what areas maybe do you want to dive a little deeper in, what questions do you want to explore. But there's so many areas to study, and I think we do a really good job of providing so many resources that will enable people to dive deeper based on the need that they may have or the question that's arisen.
Yeah, again, Amy, one of the things I find is you were fortunate living in the area where you could go to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, but I do know people that are taking courses online from Biola or Southeastern Seminary, a variety of other places where they can actually only occasionally have to travel to the campus. And so whether you're, in your case, a mom with 4 kids or an individual that is located very close to one of those campuses, they're just great opportunities for study, aren't there?
Absolutely. And you can even audit classes to where if you don't want to invest in a degree, there's the opportunity to be able to audit to where you can sit in and listen and glean without, you may not come out with a degree at the end of it, but you're still getting the exact same knowledge. So it's really a matter of, it's in your court. The ball is in your court. You can pick up the books and you can dive in. You can listen to the podcasts, read the blogs. There's so many resources out there that did not exist 20 years ago. It truly is a blessing to women of all faith journeys.
I remember conversations I've had in the past when he was alive with Norm Geisler, but more recently even with Sean McDowell. We just need to get more women in apologetics. Back in the old days, it was Nancy Piercy and maybe 1 or 2 others. And now just look at this. You have a Women in Apologetics Conference. So for those of you that have always wanted to maybe study this, I think you can see that these 2 women have been able to study in ways that are going to be helpful for you. And whether you just want to learn a little bit more for your own growth or you want to learn a little bit more to help your children and grandchildren, I think there's some places for you. So that's why we wanted to feature this in the first hour. We come back, though, I thought I'd go around the round table and ask them what are some of the big issues they think we're going to be facing in the 21st century. Why am I asking that? Because it's a question I get all the time. Matter of fact, I must have been asked it 3 or 4 times when I was traveling in Georgia and South Carolina, so I want to hear their answer. But what are the big issues? We'll talk about that with them right after these important messages.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Next hour, we will get back into issues in the news, but I thought you would certainly appreciate this conversation with two very intelligent women who are part of the Women in Apologetics Conference taking place in a couple of weeks. So we've given you advance notice, and if you would like to attend, that is still possible for many of you to drive or to fly, and even if you cannot, take advantage of all the resources that they have there as well. Michele, I thought I'd put you on the spot first, and that is, what are maybe some of the big issues, some of the ones that you're trying to tackle right now, or some of the areas where you think we really need to come up with good Christian answers in this area of apologetics?
I think it all stems around identity. And that can be all-encompassing to gender identity, sexual identity, even with the advancement of AI. And I think what we really need to do is come up with succinct answers, right? But answers that lead with love. I mean, we're people are supposed to know that we're his disciples through our love. And I think that's, at least in me personally, that's what's missing, is there's an intellectual answer. But if we lead with the heart of Christ, that really is what's going to open up doors to have conversations. And doing that without compromising truth, without being a pushover, I think that's the area where, or at least in my sphere of influence that I've seen, that we need stronger answers, and answers that show the heart of God as well as the rationality and the reasons for it. Everything he's put in the Bible is for our benefit. It's the world that misconstrues it as hateful. And so I think that's the biggest challenge that I see specifically right now.
I might just mention that some of the organizations that are sponsors Stand to Reason. I just think Greg Kokel's done such a good job of answering that. At Probe Ministries, our own Sue Bolin has really addressed that. Living Hope Ministries, a couple of those organizations that are actually conference exhibitors. I think those are some resources there as well. And I think this whole idea of gender confusion and gender definition are going to be very big, so appreciate that. But Amy, some thoughts on what you think are some of the big issues?
It's not so much as a challenge to a specific issue that I've seen just from my perspective. It's actually the state of mind before that issue. So we've had generation that has been raised up never knowing a day of their lives without social media. And one of the downfalls of social media is it grooms you to present a message or an outlook that receives the most likes and follows as possible. And so you have children that have been groomed from a very young age to try and seek after worldly approval. And so much of what goes on within the world now is this hostility toward truth and this idea of, no, we have to shut down anything that doesn't have this mass affirmation appeal. And so one of the challenges that I've seen with whether it's parent attendant in conferences or even kids being open to discussion of questions is this initial hostility to just asking the question to begin with. And I think that's one of those things that we have to address as a church as a whole, to recognize, wait a second, we are called to come let us reason. We're called to discuss. And if we have a culture that has been able to sort of take over and say, no, if it regards this issue, anything within the realm of Christianity, if we are discussing that is considered hate speech, we need to shut that down, silence it. Now we don't have an opportunity for critical thought to even take place. We can't even wrestle with these issues. So one of the biggest challenges I'm seeing in our culture today is just the inability to think well, to where we have this culture that has been groomed to react emotionally rather than think critically. So I think that's one of the big stumbling blocks that we need to remove as a Christian culture to help people understand that, yes, we can tackle these big issues in a loving way, and it's important because you matter, and the truth matters, and the truth has a direct reflection of who you are, your identity, and what's going on in this world. And that I think is probably one of the big things that we need to address.
There's this comedian, and she actually is very much involved in a variety of different aspects, but one of her bits is she says, now I just want to say something, back in the 80s, even 70s, 80s, and especially 90s, we had this thing that was called critical thinking. And, we presented different views, and we were to use our brain to try. And people are howling as she goes through this whole area, because if you're older, you know exactly what she's talking about. But if you're younger, you're going, that's pretty hilarious. Yeah, I guess we're not really thinking. We're just taking on emotional stands. And that, again, is due a lot part to the social media, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in part there. But, it's not just social media. We've had this change within our children's education, even to to include children's media that is, no, we just need to remove any sort of competition. Instead, everybody has to be a winner. And we think of these things as, oh, it's innocuous, it's just making them feel better. But really, it's also an assault on the existence of truth and falsehood. And so we've had this systematically in place since the time of the millennial generation, to where now we have people that are, as Ricky Gervais, another comedian, very vulgar individual, he did a bit too, to where he was talking about the creation of man, about how, he fought dinosaurs and can take down lions. But then when we get to the 21st century, he's terrified of words. And, everybody in the audience was laughing, but that is the unfortunate state of where we're at, because now we're seeing words and ideas as open hostility.
Michele, we've had, of course, Jonathan Haidt on his book, The Coddling of the American Mind. As a matter of fact, the most recent outlook on Gen Z talks about the generation, the anxious generation. It does seem to me that we have a real need to teach critical thinking in the homes, in the Christian schools, and in the home schools, even if it isn't going to be taught sometimes in the public schools, don't you think?
I absolutely agree with that. I mean, critical thinking, it's a skill that sadly has fallen by the wayside. But to Amy's point, I mean, to understand truth and to be able to even engage in those conversations, thinking critically is so essential. And sadly, it's a trait that's been lost. But I think it's something that, to the best of our ability, we need to encourage that. And what I have found is, when you start having those conversations and they start thinking critically, they enjoy that, because the younger generation, they're so hungry for truth. They have a really good sense of when they're being lied to, and they're seeking truth. And that is such a blessing, because we have the truth. It's just helping them get there and asking the right questions and engaging in those conversations.
I was going to bring that up. This has been a generation where people have been selling them things for so long that they're very skeptical, and the rest. Just before we run out of time, Michele, let me, if I can, have you talk about how people can connect up with you. You are a speaker. You're a curriculum developer. If people come to the conference, they'll get a chance to meet you, maybe even go to your session. But if people want to contact you, where are some likely places we might be able to find you and learn more?
Absolutely. So the Women in Apologetics website is the first place to go if you'd like to connect with me. I will be there. I will be a breakout speaker. So I would love to meet people in person. But that's probably a number one place. To be honest, I'm not a big social media person. So I have a few links, but I'm hardly ever on it. So I would just encourage, please email me, please reach out. I'd love to have these conversations, and I'd love to see as many people as possible out in Grapevine, Texas.
Amy, yours easy, Salt and Grace, and we've got the link there to both X and Facebook. And so Salt and Grace Apologetics, it's pretty much one-stop shopping. So that's where they can find you. And again, you're available to come and speak and develop and be involved in women's ministry and a variety of other things, aren't you?
Absolutely. And if people are looking for more information with regards to podcasts, blogs, resources, it's all on our Mama Bear Apologetics website, where you just type it in, MAMA, bearapologetics.com, and you can get all resources to help you have that great conversation. So
we've got the links to all of those things that I just mentioned on the website at pointofview.net, which hopefully is the one-stop shopping there. But Michele, thank you for joining us today by phone. I'd love to meet you face-to-face. And Amy, thank you for coming into the studio today.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into some of the issues in the news, but a good time to take action. If you received an email from me, I've got a picture there of our friend Senator Tim Scott, who is one of the individuals who has sponsored what is called FIRM, Financial Integrity and Regulation Management Act. The FIRM Act is one to address this issue of debanking. It's something we've talked about so often here on Point of View. It is a way in which we can take what the president has tried to do with an executive order, but to actually make sure that debanking doesn't happen in the future. And there are many people, as we've talked about on the program, that have been victims of that. And it's time to contact your two United States senators. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
I just want to commend you guys on your program. I love listening to you. It's a blessing. Been listening to you for several years. Your program has helped my family see current events and elections and politics through the eyes and the principles of Scripture. And that's been enlightening, and we're trying to pass that on to others.
I want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed the Millennial Roundtable, and I love the program altogether. I think Kerby is great, and I really appreciate all of y'all, all that y'all do, and the truth that y'all put out.
Hey, great show. Love all your comments and what you're talking about.
Thanks again for what you do.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about some of the issues in the news, but one of those, of course, is the shooting of Charlie Kirk. And you've heard many of the comments already made on this program, and I do want to thank those who were guest hosts on this program while we were out traveling, but I thought I'd add a little bit to this as well. First of all, we've known of Charlie Kirk for some time. I guess I can't say that I've known him since he was 18 years of age. Ben Shapiro the other day was talking about when they first met at 18, but shortly thereafter, I remember that we did a broadcast or two by phone with him, so we have certainly watched what he has been doing and have seen the growth of what today is called Turning Point USA. As a matter of fact, the connection between Charlie Kirk and Point of View is easy to see if you go to our website right now, because one of the things we've posted is the award that we gave to him a number of years ago. 3 years ago, there was what we created for our 50th anniversary. After Point of View had been around for 50 years, started 50 years before by Marlon Maddox, and I came around as fast as I could. We then began what is called the Marlon Maddox Award, and he was the first recipient. Ellie Bestucky's also been a recipient of the award as well. And so this is the short speech that he gave as he received it, and then headed off because his wife was pregnant with the daughter that you've now seen. So if you are interested in seeing Charlie Kirk speaking at the Point of View event, which took place a number of years ago, our major speakers were Ben Shapiro and Michele Bachmann, which is, if you think about this, Ben Carson, I should say, Michele Bachmann and Charlie Kirk. That's a pretty good lineup for our event. And so, again, you can see the connection there as well. Now, about that same period of time, a little bit afterwards, I got a phone call from a friend of mine who said, I've been asked to actually join Turning Point USA to work in their area of education. And matter of fact, he is now the CEO of Turning Point Academy. And I was very encouraging for a couple of reasons. First of all, Turning Point USA is a well-run organization. I've never been to the headquarters, but our good friend Kelly Shackelford and his wife had been there and told me so many great things about how that was organized and what was happening there. Then also I said, because this individual is closer to my age, matter of fact, he may even be older. It's hard to always tell people's ages. He brings a lot of experience. He had been for a while, the headmaster of, what was it back then? It was the Academy. I think it was Heritage Christian Academy. And he was the headmaster and had heard a previous student by the name of Charlie Kirk had been there for, third, fourth, and fifth grade. And so they connected up. He was not the headmaster when Charlie Kirk was there, but he was the headmaster. And I said, I think you would add quite a bit because you could provide some, if you will, Christian input to him as well. But I also said, as you said, well, do you have any concerns? I said, yeah, one, he's 20-something at the time. Now he was, as we know, he just was shot when he was age 31, almost 32. Sometimes 20-somethings tend to say some things that, might not be the best way to say it. And there are times when you are, especially when you start doing a live talk show a live radio show like we're doing right now, it may have seemed like a good idea, and then afterwards you say, I probably could have said that a little bit better. And so I said, you have been, in some respects, a bit of a mentor to him, if not directly, because he was not there when you were the headmaster, but certainly you've had an influence. I think that would be positive as well. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the background there as well. Even over the weekend, I had a chance to meet with somebody that has had a very profound influence in Charlie Kirk's life and has actually been credited with providing Charlie Kirk with the first major donation he got to Turning Point, which, if I've got the facts right, is the former governor of the state of Montana. Then one of the other very significant gifts that really launched Turning Point USA came from Foster Freeze. And some of you might remember we've had Foster Freeze on the program. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of some of those ideas related to that. And I thought I would use maybe this piece by Kevin McCullough before we take a break. It's our first article here. Kevin McCullough's been on the program before. He's a talk show host and actually has interacted through the Salem Radio Network over the years with Charlie Kirk. And he talks about the kind of experiences that you oftentimes would have when he would set up his particular place where it would say, prove me wrong. And he talks about the fact that many times you were running into individuals that were interested in transgenderism. And Kevin McCullough says, body parts can be changed, minds can be drugged, hormones can be pumped through a system, but the DNA never changes. And Charlie Kirk knew this. And so then takes us to a story of a young individual who actually came up and made the point about whether I should actually transition. And he told her that his opinion might not be very popular. He asked her to tell him the bigger picture of her story. He listened. As she reiterated her question, he cautioned her and told her that he hoped and prayed for her that she would get an independent diagnosis for what's going on inside of her heart and mind before going down the path of doing something of permanent damage to her body. And one of the things that Kevin McCullough says is it was most likely one of the kindest things the girl had ever been told. It ran against everything she'd been told prior, but with humility and care for the student, he showed her love. And the point he was making is that oftentimes when you are dealing with very difficult questions, and he talks about the fact that Charlie might have just even prayed, Lord, give me the right answer. There are times when many times am asked a very difficult question and I wonder, how am I going to answer that? And in the old days, before I did this talk show, I probably spent a fair amount of time on campus. And as I shared with some people this last week when I was in Georgia and South Carolina, the university campus is a great place to test your scholarship. It's a brutal place to test your scholarship, especially since a lot of what I did was to go into the classroom, but also even in these open air meetings, free speech platforms, conferences, individual debates, and all sorts of other things in the evening. And again, he is pointing out that in some respects, the university, which was much more open than it was back in the 70s and 80s and even early 90s, is not open today. When we come back from the break, I'll talk about that because, again, Kevin McCullough reminds us of the fact that really we have this upside-down situation with the colleges, and as a result, that, I think, is one of the reasons why we've had the shootings and the other things that have happened. And so I want to get into that in a few minutes before we move to some other topics. But if you are interested in maybe reading a story by Kevin McCullough, who knew Charlie Kirk and talked about how, in some respects, he was very firm in his convictions, but also tried to be gracious in his response. You can read that as our first article. We'll get into some others right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
What does the word Christian mean these days? It doesn't seem to mean very much. The last few reports from George Barna's Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University reveal that a very small percentage of American Christians have a Christian worldview. Nearly 7 in 10 of Americans self-identify as Christians, yet only 4% of Americans have a Christian worldview. George Barna explains Christian has become somewhat of a generic term rather than a name that reflects a deep commitment to passionately pursuing and being like Jesus Christ. The self-identified Christians may embrace many basic doctrines of the Christian faith, but then diverge in one or more important issues. For example, a significant number deny the idea of objective truth rooted in Scripture. They deny the existence of absolute truth and thus make their decisions based upon relative ethics and personal experience. Most Christians may say they believe in the Bible and the gospel message, but they also indicated on their surveys that they believe people are basically good. Of course, if people believe they are good, then they may not believe in sin and the need for a Savior. Now, if you look at the cultural issues, you'll find even more discrepancies between their views and a Christian worldview. These differences in biblical beliefs will then manifest themselves in the widely divergent views today held among American Christians on questions of morality and politics. This includes divergent views on sex, marriage, family, and abortion, and those in turn affect how American Christians vote on candidates and key political issues. If you're a pastor or Bible teacher, you need to get back to the basics. It is likely that many of the people you teach do not have a Christian worldview. They need your biblical teaching and biblical discipleship. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's see if we can get into the rest of this piece by Kevin McCullough, because he reminds us of how the university has changed. There was a time when sometimes if I was invited into a classroom, even a liberal professor would say, well, now you've had a chance to hear from me, so we're giving Mr. Anderson a chance to give a different point of view. But as Kevin McCullough points out, we really live in an upside-down world. He says colleges, once the marketplaces of ideas, now function more like fortresses of ideology. Question the orthodoxy of the liberal ideas on campus, and you get canceled or debanked. I just had Amy a minute ago ask me, what did debanking mean? Well, we'll refuse to provide banking services to you. We've gone from canceling the culture and canceling you from being able to even speak, to deplatforming you from social media, to now even preventing you from having access to banking services. And so again, if you change the existing ideology or narrative, you could be losing your future, as we've seen now, even losing your job. His argument is we need to provide an alternative, discourse over violence. He said Charlie didn't shout down students. He didn't sneer at them. He handed them a microphone and would certainly challenge them if they were making false statements, but tried as much as possible with logic and history and facts to do that. And as we've talked about before, if we really want to exercise civility, that demands humility of some sort. It demands patience. It demands truth-telling. It demands a conviction without arrogance, and that's certainly what he's talking about there. And so we're going to probably have to understand that the weapons of our warfare are not physical but spiritual. So we certainly need to pray. But we also, as we even talked about in this first hour, know how to answer, know why you believe, know how to defend the viewpoint. And if you win people with good arguments and with love, you can soften hearts, you can change minds, you can really begin to make a difference. So he ends his piece by saying, pray, listen, speak truth in love. Because in the end, truth doesn't need fists, it needs a voice. Charlie gave his voice to that noble cause until the day his life was cut short, and that is his lasting legacy. And that brings me to what can we do? And that is, first of all, to recognize how important it is to see this as a very significant moment. If you have been out on the internet at all, you're well aware of the fact that there are people that are saying, I decided to go to church yesterday for the first time in a long time, or maybe first time ever, because of what happened to Charlie Kirk. I saw a striking difference between the riots that broke out 5 years ago and the prayer vigils that broke out this week. I've seen people say, I have been a Democrat all my life and I'm going to register as a Republican. And not that that's the answer to every problem, but it does seem to me that this can be a chance to invite somebody to come to church. It can be an opportunity to maybe encourage somebody who's never voted to get involved in the political process. There are all sorts of things that we can do. But I also suggest that we could maybe learn a lesson from Charlie Kirk, and that is be willing to debate some of these ideas. And one of the more pernicious ideas that has surfaced over the last couple of days is what I call the both sides argument. And one of the individuals that I think has written a very good piece, Batya Ungar-Sargon, I've quoted her before. She served for quite some time as the deputy opinion editor of Newsweek. She now hosts a program in News Nation. If you've ever watched Bill Maher, and I do from time to time, you'll see her on there. But she also sometimes appeared on Charlie Kirk's program, and she appreciated the fact that even though she may have disagreed with him on many issues, he was willing to engage in that conversation. But she is writing to, as an individual, as a leftist, or I'm starting to say former leftist. I see she's another one of those people that's kind of going through a transition. But in her latest piece, she said, look, the culture on the left has got to come to grips with something, and that is they seem to be opposed to an honest, spirited debate, and they have demonized the other side, she says, as hateful, as fascism, and as Nazism. And she goes on to say, look, when you call your political opponents Hitler enough times, you've signed their death warrant. Pretty striking statement for an individual that used to write for Newsweek magazine. She then talks about the fact that on the one hand, we have some of these Democratic leaders and pundits and politicians and others 1 minute criticize the violence, the next minute then call for a war against Trump and his supporters using what are called fighting words. She goes into that in some details. And she finally says, look, I've got a revelation for you. The violence is coming from inside your house. She says, after decades of demonizing right-wing voices with legitimate views in fact shared by most Americans. And then talks about the fact that, yes, there are, of course, some examples of attacks on Democrats. Over the last couple of days, people have called back and you have to go back a year or two to get Gabby Giffords in there. Or let's just talk about the two state legislators, Mark and Melissa Hortman in Minnesota. But those pale in comparison to, I don't know, you could take quite a few examples, whether it's Steve Scalise, whether it's the various attacks by individuals that had some kind of transgender ideology, which seems to maybe even be the effect here, and many others. And as a result, to say, if anything, this is coming from most of the left and the right. And again, I think we just have to always say the obvious. That is, political violence is wrong, whether committed by black or white, whether committed by liberal or conservative. But you're going to start running into some individuals over these last few weeks who are arguing, no, almost all of these attacks are coming from people on the right side of the spectrum. And that doesn't fit at all with what we've seen, what we've reported, even the normal statistics. And then they start citing statistics which just don't even seem to pass the straight face test. And so one of the individuals that took the time to kind of dig into this is Michael Knowles. Now, Michael Knowles has been on this program, and he points out, and let's just use an example. Michael Knowles, of course, is involved with the broadcast that Ben Shapiro does and the podcast, and Michael Knowles has written a number of books, and I've got some of them on my shelf, by the way. But he found out that there are real biases in the way in which those statistics are collected. Let's use one example. Since he's in Nashville, you might remember the trans shooter that went in and shot all the children there in Nashville in a Presbyterian Christian school, right? Remember that? Well, that one was not listed as political violence. I'm not sure how they're going to list this one with Charlie Kirk, but you start going through the list and you realize if indeed there's a shooting and it's against an individual like maybe Mark and Melissa Hortman or Gabby Giffords or something of that nature, or certainly January 6th, well, those are political violence. But these others, they're not political violence because, quote, they're not ideological. Again, read the manifesto or even excerpts of the manifesto from the individual that went into the Christian school and shot those kids, and you can see that they're ideological. So the point is that I think it's going to be really important for us over the next couple of days to at least try to inject some honesty into this conversation and maybe even show people the difference between the reaction to some of the violence that was taking place 5 years ago and the reaction that we see today. We come back, I'll talk about the fact that we even see some of that in some places on college football, and even in the increasing number of individuals who have said, maybe it's time to start a new chapter of Turning Point USA on our campus. So I have that as our second article, and we'll come back and talk about that for a little bit longer and then move on to other issues in the news, because after all, there's been a lot of other things happening in the news, and we don't want to focus just on this, although we will be talking about it, I suspect, for weeks. Once again, let me point you to the website. There's a place for you to take action today. Contact your 2 United States senators about debanking. We also, of course, have the video of Charlie Kirk at the Point of View 50th Anniversary Gala, and we'll come back and continue our conversation about what we can do to be salt and light, to be a positive ambassador for Christ in this 21st century. Let's take a break, though. You can find many of these articles on the website, including some of the links to our guests that appeared in studio and by phone in the last hour. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
The Bible tells us not to worry. And yet, there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes, even knowing what to pray can be difficult. And that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again. Let's, if we can, maybe give some credit where credit is due. All of us around the table here certainly appreciate the governor of the state of Utah, but also appreciate House Speaker Mike Johnson, who in the past has been on the program with us back when he worked with First Liberty Institute. And, of course, he is the Speaker of the House, also a Republican from the state of Louisiana. He was on the other day during the Talking Head shows, and he said the key is to remember that you can disagree with someone vehemently on policy and not hate them as a person. Well said. He went on at Numport to say, people have got to stop framing simple policy disagreements in the terms of existential threats to our democracy and all the phrases you hear all the time. You've heard this. We've got to deal with this guy Trump. We've got to deal with this MAGA movement because they're an existential threat to democracy. Well, and then he goes on to say, you can't call the other side fascist and enemies of the state and not understand that there are some, as he said, deranged people in our society who will take that as a cue to act and do crazy and dangerous things. We are a very divided country, and there have been some that really hope for us to eventually have unity. I don't know that that's even possible biblically. I mean, remember at one point Jesus was asked about this, and remember in Matthew 10, he talks about the fact that I came to bring division. And of course, the division oftentimes is the theological division. People are offended by the cross. You don't have to be offensive, but there is a sense in which as soon as you start saying that certain things are right and certain things are wrong, that gets you in trouble. And there were times I would walk into a classroom and the people hated me and they've never met me. Because as soon as you're introduced as a Christian, that's enough. I hate Christians. I hate Christianity. I hate the idea that you believe in God. And that's going to be there anyway. But I think if anything, we should be working to exercise some level of civility. And there have been a number of commentators talking about this. Even those on the left was watching the other day on the Bill Maher program, the editor of The Atlantic. We have certainly seen cases of assassination. Abraham Lincoln in 1965, James Garfield in 1865, James Garfield in 1881, William McKinley, 1901, John F. Kennedy in 1963, assassination attempts, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump, no doubt about that. And, of course, we've had representatives from Steve Scalise to Gabby Giffords and on and on and on. But these are at least political people. These are people whose votes, policies affect you. This seems a little different, in which you're talking about an individual that just disagrees with you, and that's enough for killing that individual. And so this is why I think this has struck a nerve. And one of the ways to illustrate that gets to our second article, and that is under Charlie Kirk, the organization known as Turning Point USA had about 9,000 chapters, which is amazing, and also had about 11 chapters in high schools. Well, you can read this article for yourself. Since the speech by Charlie Kirk's wife, and many of you probably watched that, Erica Kirk, Turning Point has received, and this is a number they verified, 18,000 requests to start new chapters. Now, that doesn't mean that all of those will become chapters, but this is more than twice the number that they have right now. And even if half of those do, it is just a remarkable expansion. And as Sarah Arnold points out, in some respects, this may be the real turning point, a phrase she says that now means far more than it did when Charlie Kirk launched Turning Point USA in a garage in the state of Illinois. His death didn't silence the movement. It lit a fire not only on Americans, but people around the world. And if you've watched any of the videos, the vigils, the marches, and the rest, you can see that that has been very significant. I did not know till I heard his wife, Erica Kirk, talk about the fact that his favorite college team was the Oregon Ducks. I did not know that. Remember seeing one time where he was talking about his loved Chicago Bears on the NFL, but it's interesting that if you, again, watch some of the videos right there in Eugene, Oregon, where all this various players kneeling at the University of Oregon, and the Oregon football coach, Dan Lanning, actually was able to address that issue in kind of what was called a post-game presser, in which after they rolled all over Northwestern, said, I hurt for his wife, Erica, and their kids. This sort of evil should never exist in our country, and that's what it is, evil. I'm starting to see more and more people really wanting to call it evil. He says, I recently found out that Charlie Kirk was an Oregon fan. Didn't know that. And then, of course, talks about hurting for the family. I remember having to explain to the issue of evil to my family. I remember sitting down with my kids and explaining what happened, and they're talking about people talking about it in school. And so he spent a fair amount of time certainly talking about Charlie Kirk and the impact that he has had in the culture. And again, let's, if we can, give credit where credit is due. I've heard more than a few people say, hey, how about we run the Utah Governor Spencer Cox for vice president? If you've seen any of his press conference, pretty impressive, and really do appreciate some of the statements that he has made. But I think I'd also be wise in pointing out that at the press conference, he did say that the shooter was living with his transgender romantic partner, and that it was basically an individual that was described as a male transitioning to female. And again, Governor Spencer Cox said that his partner has been incredibly cooperative, had no idea this was happening, and has been working with the investigators. So again, these are some very sad commentaries that have unfolded over the last couple of days. We will certainly learn more, and we'll continue, obviously, covering that here on Point of View. But since I mentioned Bill Maher, one of the other articles I posted for you, which I think would be very interesting for you to see, has to do with the back and forth between Ben Shapiro, who was on with Bill Maher. And Sarah Arnold puts it this way: just days after the assassination of conservative leader Charlie Kirk, comedian and atheist Bill Maher took aim at the Bible itself, calling it full of nonsense and wickedness. Now, she says the timing of the remarks coming amid a national outpouring of grief for a man who championed faith and virtue didn't go unnoticed. And Bill Maher made those comments during the discussion with, of all people, Ben Shapiro. And I thought that's interesting because Ben Shapiro then comes back and says, look, if that's the case, then why do you and I agree on morality like 87.5% of the time? I'm a Jew and you're an atheist. And the point that Ben Shapiro was making is simply this. He says, we grew up in a Western society that has had several thousand years of biblical history behind it. So you can think you hit that triple and you formed your own morality, but in reality, you were born morally on third base. I don't know if he's a baseball fan, but it was a great illustration because that's the case. Charlie Kirk, of course, has got his new book out right now, and I've got a commentary that we just mentioned the other day. But it is, I think, striking on the fact that he wanted to remind Bill Maher that Western civilization rests on a Christian foundation. There is a very good book that was written a number of years ago by an individual that argued very persuasively, Glenn Sunshine, that really you had Rome and then you had Christianity, and really the Western culture is Rome plus Western culture that is based on biblical morality. So Rome plus the Bible gives you Western culture. Once you lose biblical culture, you go back to Rome. And that's exactly what we find right now, because in the Roman Empire, there wasn't this idea of compassion and virtue and rights of women and all sorts of things. Those came from Christianity. So Rome plus Christianity gave you Western culture. And as Ben Shapiro, I think, wisely said to Bill Maher, you didn't make your way to third base. You grew up on third base because you grew up already accepting many of these ideas that were part of Western culture, which were rooted in biblical ideas. Of course, the prediction of Glenn Sunshine is if we don't have some kind of revival or reformation, we go back to looking like Rome. And there was a book came out a number of years ago by a secular person even asking the question, are we Rome? In some respects, we're looking more like the Roman Empire than ever before. But it was a great argument, and it's just an illustration again. We are the inheritors of some of those biblical ideas, which are the foundation of Western culture.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me, if I can, end with a very good piece by Pastor Jack Hibbs, of course, knew Charlie Kirk and many others. But let me just, as a program note, mention that, first of all, we're going to have Dr. William Varner on with us tomorrow. He will be talking about this new Legacy Bible, and he is a professor at Masters University. Give us a chance also to talk about John MacArthur and some others. He's just published a final book in the Life of Christ trilogy, so going to just spend some time talking about how to dig into God's Word and how to understand it. Second hour, tomorrow we'll get into some of the various articles that I found helpful. One of those by former Senator Ben Sasse. University trustees have their heads in the sand. Not only, of course, is he a former senator, but he's also a former president. He was a president of one in Nebraska and then also University of Florida, and he's got some solutions to how to address some of these issues, because some of the rot that is coming from not only the universities, but unfortunately even from some of the social media are things that we should address if we really begin to and want to turn this country around. So those are some things we'll be talking about tomorrow right here on Point of View. But Jack Hibbs has this piece, which is really kind of a summary of his book, which we talked about recently, and it's a good opportunity to see that here it published in the Real Clear Religion. Always encouraged when Christians, even pastors, get published in what would be kind of a secular venue because others get to read it. And Pastor Jack Hibbs calls it the false and the true. He says the signs are everywhere, posted outside of residences and businesses alike, are announcements that a security service protects the premises. One of the unfortunate realities of our world is rising lawlessness, which makes people desperate for safety from the outside world. Yet the one place where we should be safe, God's house, is not always the case. Jesus said, "I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief does not come except to steal, to kill, and to destroy." And here he's talking about the fact that we have spiritual thieves masquerading as Christians, and they're happy to rob you of your faith, steal your liberty in Christ, and lie about it in the process. Unfortunately, most of us will be taken advantage of at least once in our lifetime, but no deception is more dangerous or hurtful than when it's directed at spiritual things and empowered by Satan. He goes on to say that the last several chapters in his book focus primarily on the spiritual charlatans associated with the last days, and he gives names and individuals in that regard. We've seen how the dynamics of the spiritual truths and falsehoods are played out in the physical realm, yet because we traffic in the material world, we quickly forget how connected we are with the spiritual battle between darkness and light. He says we would do well to remember 3 areas vulnerable to demonic attack. The first, he says, is religion. Satan loves to infiltrate religious settings in his quest to deceive. But if someone isn't interested in religion, that's okay. He has another line of attack: politics. Globally, nations are cracking under the strain of recent events, and in response, leaders are ushering in ideologies promising a collective utopia that human nature renders impossible. Yet citizens looking to replace God with government as the provider of every need are falling for this deception wholesale. And then there are the dark powers present in the realm of business. Satan makes it a point to move among the movers and the shakers of the business world. If you have any doubts, look at companies like, he says, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. Dig into the extent of their individual holdings, some of which might surprise you. Those 3 giants are hard at work to provide everything required for a community or a nation to function, making other options unnecessary. For example, Jeff Bezos envisions Amazon becoming embedded in a consumer's lifestyle. His goal is to make Amazon a daily habit. Small and medium-sized businesses are closing at breakneck speed because they can't compete with these types of global conglomerates. He goes on to say, why is this happening? Control. A famous quote taken from a letter that English historian Lord Acton wrote to Bishop Crichton in 1887 sums it up perfectly. Acton believed that the same moral standard should be applied to all men, political and religious leaders alike, because he said power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Power and corruption often go hand in hand, and Satan knows this. He goes on to say that the advances of satanic influence in government and industry are indisputable. But the devil's most virulent attacks are aimed at weakening the church. In writing to the believers in Corinth, the Apostle Paul warned false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ, and no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works. 2 Corinthians 11, verses 13 to 15. So it goes on to say false apostles, doing false ministry in what is no doubt false churches, are those who promise much but offer nothing. These types of leaders are wells without water, clouds carried by a tempest, 2 Timothy 2, verse 17. And to the early Christians, the language was graphic. For us to grasp a full meaning, we need to dig a little deeper. The necessity of a well implies thirst. For most of us, this is hard to relate because quenching our thirst usually involves grabbing a glass and turning on the kitchen tap to fill it with water. But imagine traveling throughout the United States' driest place, California's Death Valley, and running out of water. If this happened, you would be go hunting for a well, and if you found one, you'd drop a rock down the well and listen. What would you listen for? A splash. The sound you don't want to hear is the telltale sign of a dead, empty well. Silence. The same response people looking for refreshment from false teachers get. When you hang around those types of waterless wells long enough, you will begin to think that they define what the well should be. Dry with nothing except a sandy bottom, incapable of offering refreshment, but without spiritual water, there's no vitality, which equals dead Christianity. His current concern is that no matter where we look, in religion, in government, in business, there are lots of deceptions. That's, of course, why he wrote his book. But this piece here, The False and the True, reminds us that we are perhaps going to be called to even more significantly use discernment and begin to think about how to identify false ideas. That's what we're dedicated to doing here at Point of View. That's what we hope that we can teach you to have greater discernment, to learn more about these deceptive ideas, and to counter them with biblical ideas. So if nothing else, we encourage you to go to the website today. You'll learn quite a bit about the Women in Apologetics Conference. We have some great articles for you to read. And of course, as I mentioned, we have the video of Charlie Kirk speaking at Point of View's 50th anniversary gala. Just a great opportunity to once again reconnect with you, and I'm looking forward to a great week here on Point of View. Most importantly, I want to thank both Megans for engineering the program today. Also want to thank Steve for his help producing the program, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
America's founding was shaped by a biblical worldview, but you will rarely hear that truth today. Think about this. If your child or grandchild was asked to articulate how Christian values shaped America's founding based on the education they received in school and from popular media, could they do it? Well, you can be part of restoring an appreciation for America's godly heritage, and we need you. Truth Team Week is right around the corner, kicking off September 22nd, and you're invited to participate in Point of View's mission to restore America's godly heritage and a Christian worldview in this nation by joining the Truth Team. But you don't have to wait to make a difference. You can make a donation right now and learn more about the Truth Team by visiting us online at pointofview.net. or by calling 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.